to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journey.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we are so excited to have Cary on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much.
Of course, we are looking forward to discussing your multidiscipline creative career, how you balance wearing multiple hats, learning more about your own art gallery that you run, as well as recording a bonus segment on networking as an artist and gallery owner for podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
But real quick, before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit more about you and your background for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work. So Cary is a Raleigh-based fiber artist, musician, and gallery owner whose unique fabric collages have been collected and exhibited all over the United States. She is the owner and curator of the Pocket Gallery, where she shows her own work as well as represents and promotes the work of numerous Triangle area artists. Cary was the artist in residency at ArtSpace from 2015 to 2020 and served on its board from 2016 to 2020. She currently serves on the board of the Longleaf School of the Arts, and in addition to that very impressive resume, has crossed paths with many of the artists we've had on the podcast today, and so we're so excited to have you on.
I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And again, as I said before we started recording, I'm really impressed with y'all's efforts in creating this podcast and getting out the voices of so many artists in the area. It's really a valuable and I know very labor-intensive thing that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for noticing, Caitlin, and for your kind words. Yeah, it's one of those, and folks that have heard us on the podcast, we say this a lot. We're very big into sharing forward. And when we got started, we had so many generous artists share their advice. This is how we get back. This is our version of that. But of course, Jackie did a formal introduction about you. But Caitlin, how would you describe your work to somebody who has never seen it before, especially since some of the folks listening to this might be in the car or in the studio with their hands up on the easel?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you all are busy. I make work from fabric and stitch. I work on a sewing machine and I use mostly upholstery fabric and remnants and samples, things that would otherwise be thrown away. That's a big part of my ethos. In fact, today was a large battle of the fabric wills, of trying to find, my needs are specific, but my ethics are not to not pay for things. So today was an adventure in chasing down some scraps of of a certain kind of fabric. I guess it kind of sometimes turns into the challenge that I don't know what I'm trying to say, except for sometimes it becomes very effortful, where I probably ought to just buy this stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, it's like a big scavenger hunt, so to speak. It's hard to have like a creative vision with a very specific idea of what you want, but also a process and means of getting that material that's also very specific. So when they don't work together, I mean, imagine that be a little.
It can be a frustration. Yes, I try to let the materials that I already have guide the thinking, but sometimes the thinking gets in front of the supply chain. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I began making this work in about 2013 or 14, and well, before that, I had been sewing fabric onto paper, making little cute greeting cards with, making a drawing and cutting it out of fabric and sewing it onto paper, which was a sort of a pleasing thing in and of itself, because fabric and stitch is cute. But I sort of quickly moved from, I just wanted to move up the scale of it. And somewhere along the way, the idea of working from photographs occurred to me. Rather than trying to draw my designs, I started working from photographs, and that sort of morphed quickly into kind of aligned with this feeling I was having at that time about the changes in our city. I moved to this medium-sized city in the 90s, and all of a sudden I was beginning to feel as though all the things that made me understand where I lived were being either torn down or occluded by new construction, and I got real sentimental, and so I spent a number of years creating these works out of fabric depicting what I say the humble landmarks of Raleigh, the by the way restaurants that everyone goes to, and the known landmarks too, but mostly with an eye to unique and quirky places. So that was my line for for the past however long that is, until the last few years, in which I have branched out and begun to flirt with some abstraction. Sometimes I still work realistically, or you can't really call it realistically because it's made out of cloth, but with the idea that you'll know what it is, because my work lends itself to commission. So I do portraits of people's houses or their family business or what have you. And I'm also getting ready to actually make a new series of landmarks for an upcoming show, because I promised a bunch of people another calendar. And so I have to make 12 pieces because there are 12 months. So there we go. So that was long-winded. That was long-winded, but
funny how we do that.
The rule is it has to be made out of fabric for me. That's kind of the one unifying
that tie through between. And I'm curious, I mean, it's a very tactile process that you have, talking about gathering the materials, deciding which local landmarks, your reaction to the local landscape and how it influences your work. But kind of looking back to the beginning of your career, when did you first feel like you could call yourself a professional artist?
That's such a easy question to answer, and it has so much to do with art space. I was working on my dining room table for a number of years, and I had sold I don't know, a solid handful of pieces, and I got brave and applied for the artist in residency, the regional emerging artist in residency at ArtSpace. And I didn't get it the first time, and I got even braver, having failed once, and applied again and got it in 2015. And the status, if there's not a better word for that conferred on me, really sort of elevated me in my own mind to be able to use that word about myself, and to because what it affords you is mostly, or the main benefit at that time to me, was to be around other people who were making art for their living. That wasn't an immediate I didn't immediately write that on my name tag, but over the course of time, that started to feel like it applied to me. And I haven't looked back. I don't know what would happen if I did look back, because I've never really had a job. So there you go. But anyway.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how those like pivotal moments can happen when, I mean, you put yourself out there, apply for whether it's an exhibition or a residency or something that feels maybe a little out of reach at the time.
Yeah.
And while our creative process is inherently, I mean, driven by ourselves, our creative vision, sometimes those opportunities can be very validating and kind of the marker of, you know what, I'm going to do this. And you put yourself out there, try again. And then years later, here we are.
Yeah, it's all about a feeling, really.
Yeah, and it's not like we necessarily have to have the external validation, but it definitely helps, especially when we're pivoting in our work or our style, and then somebody's like, I let me give you money. I want that. And then it's like, oh, or someone who's like in the art world, so to speak, capital A, small a, it doesn't matter, is actually like, I love your stuff. And you're just like, you do? Humble little me. So that's always nice, of course. I do want to ask you though. So my understanding is not only do you do paintings in a way, right, with fabric, but you also do music. So you're wearing a lot of different hats. How did each of these forms of expression develop in relation to one another? Did you start with the music and then went into the fabric and then went into the art, or vice versa? Give us the quick summary on that.
In some ways it feels like two different lifetimes. I I continue to make music now, but not with an aim at, I'm not shooting for the stars anymore, with my music career, which I did shoot for them and landed on some very low ones from time to time. But let's see, I'll try to give you the very Reader's Digest, which was that I came to Raleigh in 90 something, early 90s for graduate school, actually in creative writing, which I had, right. I had, that was my focus toward the end of my undergrad career. And then I took some time off. And then I came to NC State because a writer that I adored was here, Lee Smith. And I did everything but finish that dang master's degree, including teaching assistantship, where I taught freshman English and learned how terrifying that could be. And learned that I don't believe in my heart that I am an author. I had some success in writing and some small publications, but I learned that academia and probably the writer's life were not exactly me. And I also sort of accidentally joined a band right around that time, and had a whirlwind of a run with a band that had a 90s shot towards actual fame, where we did get flown out to LA and wined and dined and for a while toured in a fancy tour bus and all that stuff.
The wild 90s. I love it.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it was an extremely volatile combination of people, of which I was the angel, and of course, and it sort of in somewhat theatrical fireworksy ways exploded. And then I went on to sort of meld that with my writing past, and began writing songs and recorded a few solo records, and then grounded myself a little bit more in the triangle by marrying a fellow who I had met in the band in back in the day. And yeah, so for a good 15 or so years, my whole life was music and being on the road and writing and recording records and getting to do some really fun international touring and all that kind of thing. And I guess that somewhere along the way, I made some realizations about myself, the most important of which was that I was kind of a homebody that was forcing myself to be always away from home. And that's a really unique kind of person that anyone can do it, but not everyone can thrive in that rootless way, I feel like. And it's a hard life, it's your fortunes go up and down a lot. And I just, more and more began to feel like I wanted to make a life at home. And so all along I had been making art, but for my own pleasure and in whatever dabbling mediums I wanted to. I made things out of all kinds of things, and most of them were not very good, but all of them were hanging on the wall because that's how I was very uncritical of myself about my artwork, which was a good foundation, it turned out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so somewhere in there, I realized that I wasn't actually making my living as a musician anymore, and I started casting about for ways to make things and sell them. So all of the fabric stuff kind of started with me doing that and doing the small kinds of craft markets that were common here and that are growing in leaps and bounds. But that's always been a part of the scene around here, and which is great. And I actually ran a few art markets long time ago. So anyway, yeah.
Wait. Okay, hold on. So we have the music part, right? And we have the creative writing part. Then we get, sorry, I'm one of those people that likes to I need to see the roadmap. So you're traveling all over with the music stuff, right? When you're like, I'm not going to be a professor, away with that. And then realize, which I understand, I'm like the whole going back and forth. I've had jobs where they like fly you around, and after a while, it gets tiring pretty quick. I mean, it has a nice cachet, but then you come home and you're tired as heck. So it's like,
Yep.
anyway. So you come home, meet your beloved, right? Which is awesome. And then you start doing the markets. That earlier version of what you were doing, trying to bring it full circle, was that the cards you were talking about when you were
Yeah.
doing the markets?
Yep.
Okay, what was it about the fabric that called out to you? I'm trying to find out
Where does
where's the
that come from?
thread?
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. I don't have an awesome answer for that. My mom sewed, but I was stubborn. I didn't have any interest in learning that, and I wouldn't even iron my clothes, and she really wanted me to. But I guess some of those things I feel they do sort of get in by osmosis. My respect for what she did is enormous now, but as a kid, I didn't care about sewing or fabric all that much. Uh, but I think that really the answer that I've come to that is feels the most true is actually that I just saw those sample books of upholstery fabric in Scrap Exchange, and I thought there's
Yes.
so much there. And I can't. I had a sewing machine, and some of the earlier things that I was making to sell at markets were sewn, like pillows and things like that. So I knew how to, the basic operation of the sewing machine. And I guess, I'm just lucky that between both of my parents, they did about everything you could think of that was artsy. They played music, and my dad threw pots and carved wood and built things out of wood, and my mom made candles and was an amazing cook. And I just what was handed to me was a bravery about trying things, I guess. So I saw that fabric and said, okay, I'm going to figure out something to do with it. But that's the best explanation I can come up with. It does not have to do with a lifelong fascination with medieval tapestries or anything, darn it.
It would be great for an artist statement, though, wouldn't it?
It sure would.
But I think it is so interesting. I mean, being so multidisciplined as an artist, I mean, going from writing to music to then a very tactile experience, and hearing that your parents are the same way. It's one of those, the creative energy can't be bound by one box, right? It's just that constant, it's finding the right medium for whatever vision or idea you want to express to other people. It might be music, it may be writing, it may be a visual greeting card, it may be a piece of art that's hung on the wall, but it's whatever medium is right for it, just go in that direction.
Yeah, I guess I'm being dragged around by whims constantly. Exactly.
I think that's part of the artist's life right there, though. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
the finding or trying all the different mediums until you find the correct one. I mean, I can definitely relate. I took garment construction, doing
Uh-huh.
adult night classes. Like, why? And actually, now that you said medieval, I was building a Tudor dress with her.
There you go. Now, can you also relate to the fear of I live in this terror, like, oh my God, I'm gonna get sick of this and I have to do something else. And now that's like, oh, don't I mean, I've changed my clothes and too many times now. I gotta, but so far, knock on wood, so far so good. This seems to the
Stuck.
fabric and the method has enough possibility that I'm not too afraid that I'm going to go try to be an opera singer or something. I don't know.
Hey, never say never. Never say never.
Plus, I think that is the important thing of that exploration. Once you find the thing, you can stay in it for so long, but also without limiting yourself to like, I can expand past this. You can
Right.
always add more to it and then morph and shift if you need to, and it doesn't matter. Because
Yep.
at the end of the day, and we had a recent interview where, our guest said the same thing. It's like, it's still you, it's still your hands. It's still like, Picasso did sketches and paintings and pottery. What? It's still Picasso, so it's still Caitlin. So yeah, no,
Yeah, I
I love it.
remember having a revelation one day in my studio at Art Space and going, wait a minute, they let me in here, but that doesn't mean I can't do something different. They let me in here based on the merits of one thing, but I feel like it sort of did make me afraid for a minute there to step out of my whatever little, box I had created. But I feel like I've cracked that one reasonably well.
Yeah, and I think that is honestly a common in our ever fluctuating roller coaster of creative confidence. You kind of go through that. You have this huge high, this inspiration of a new idea. And then sometimes any level of success with that or validation, as much as we want it, then once you get it, it's, oh, well, now I have to stay here. This is what's expected of me. I don't want to let XYZ or myself down.
Right.
And then that you feel sometimes restrained by that. Which going back to our conversation of like balancing all those different things, maybe feeling not as open to exploring other mediums or other disciplines. So I'm
Right.
wondering if when you're diving deep into a project, when you try to share time between multiple disciplines, how does that process look? Or do you typically just focus on one and then table the rest? Especially when it comes to like visual art and music, you know,
Right.
and now running a gallery, which we'll get into in a little bit. But how do you resolve all of that?
Well, my insecure self would say it looks like a giant train wreck, and my and my more polished self would say, well, I I just recently my record label re-released an album, that my first full-length solo album, which was made 20 years ago, and they reissued it on vinyl for its 20th anniversary, and I you know said yes to playing a number of shows in the fall. And boy, it was hard to um, become that person again. So I do feel like a self divided in the, and there are so many things about myself as a, or my career as a visual artist that I prefer. Um, Most of which has to do with like the solitude that it affords me. When I want to come out and talk about my work, I can. And I do invite, I do enjoy and invite, sharing and talking about it. Um, but the being a singer on the stage and the front guy of a band and all that is a very different ball of wax, and it takes a ton of energy, especially now when that I'm not so up to speed on it. So it felt like it took a lot out of me, and probably it took away something from the focus of where I'm really happiest now. That said, I don't regret doing it, of course, and feel very fortunate to still, I mean, somebody still cares and wants to hear me play my music, and that's amazing. So and it was just broadcast on PBS the other day.
That's amazing. And it's so
Yeah.
funny. I have a great friend who owns a coffee shop in North Carolina, and she is a huge fan of your music, super tied into the local. She's like, wait, you're gonna have Caitlin Cary on your podcast? I was like, no offense, she's not in the art scene here. I was like, how do you know Caitlin? She's like, I'm obsessed with her music. And I was like, small world, small world.
That's really nice, and hi to your friend, and thank you so much for your ears. Yeah. But yeah, so that was a long-winded way of saying that the balance is difficult, as is the balance between doing the gallery and and repping other people's work.
Mhm.
You know, that makes more sense. It happens in the same physical space, and the energy is the same sort of energy. I know a little bit
Absolutely.
about how to do it for myself, and so and in fact, a big reason for starting the Pocket Gallery was that I thought about how much easier it is to speak passionately about other people's work than it is to do so about your own work. And when I was at Art Space, and I should say, I guess most people listening to the podcast probably know what Art Space is, but it's a group of 20 or so studios and 30 or so artists all in one building who they don't collaborate career wise, or they what am I trying to say? Everyone's doing their own thing, but in the same space. And what I used to always joke on First Friday was, hey, we all ought to swap studios. I should sit in your studio and talk about your art. And, you know,
I
because
love that idea, honestly, because I think you have
Yeah.
such a powerful point of Adriana and I used to always joke that one of the biggest things, I mean, when I first moved to Raleigh, I was like obsessed with art space. Her and I used to go there on our like artist dates. We would go out to First Friday, all the different galleries, and we always had to go to art space. And so we basically became just like art space super fans. Love talking to all the artists. So then now having studios here, just like hyping up and being a cheerleader for other creatives and also explaining their work to make sure you go to this person's studio, make sure you go to that person's studio. I
yeah,
think it's so powerful because fellow artists know the vocabulary of what their creative friends are trying to present and are
Yep.
presenting through their work. But then sometimes as artists, we may be a little more shy to talk about our work or feel like it comes off a different way. And so I love that you then took that energy to launch your gallery, which I do want to make sure we get in. Like, when did you start your gallery? Where is it? Kind of like the history of building that.
Sure, sure. So sometimes I feel dumb about this, but I gave up at my studio at Art Space that I still had a number of years on my lease because it was 2020 and it was the pandemic and my mom had just died, and which was both really difficult emotionally, but also she was living with us, and so suddenly a beautiful room opened up in our house, and so it made all the sense in the world to give up my studio, move home, and work from home, because that, if you remember what it was felt like in 2020, you didn't want to be in a place where the walls don't go up to the ceiling. You didn't even know if
Yeah.
you could breathe in public, let alone. So I came home and set up a very nice at-home studio, which I'm super fortunate, and I still have it, and it's great. But I realized that it didn't take me long to recognize that I was languishing, and all I was doing was letting the dogs in and out. And I made a lot of work. I did, but it felt really strange after over those 5 years at Art Space to not feel as though I knew who I was making the work for. And it was weird. I mean, what am I going to invite people to my house in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah. You mean
So
from like the collector standpoint? Because that's one thing that's very unique about art spaces. They're public facing studios, right?
yeah,
So people come in, they
yeah.
get to see the work, see works in progress, but also talk to the artists that are there, which is such a huge benefit to, I think, the public, but especially for the artists, which I imagine after being there for 5 years, you kind of forget how powerful and important that is because it's just
Yep.
part of your
Mhm.
process at that point.
Right. Absolutely. And I definitely felt I really missed that at home. And so a little tiny space came to our knowledge. It's located in Oakwood, which is a beautiful old neighborhood just east of Art Space, if I'm correct. I'm always lost in space, so don't quote me on that. Um, uh, and the space is in a building that was once a general store, sort of a neighborhood, grocery. And I have one little speck of it. It's about 350 square feet. And it's right across from a restaurant that kind of bustles. So we get a tiny bit of foot traffic, not a ton. It's definitely more of a destination than something that's in a shopping center or downtown, but it's there is some neighborhood activity and an active neighborhood listserv, and people sort of care about the gallery now, and of course there's a group of artists who are people that I'd say 50% of the work that I show comes directly from associations that I made at Art Space, and then other people have come to me since I opened, for opportunities. And sorry, my eyes are watering because the pollen is hazing again today, I guess. Yeah, so it's I divided up the space. There's two small walls that I rotate bi-monthly for a guest star artist. And we have we have an artist reception every 2 months for that artist. And then there's a big wall, I call it. It's not really that big, but in there it's big, the big one, that is most usually devoted to my work and my husband's work. But also we keep an open mind about that, and where we've had other artists to fill that wall. We have a very fortunate association with an artist, Leslie Pruneau, who I don't know if you've had her on the podcast.
Oh, one of my favorites. I've been begging her. Leslie, if you're listening.
We're planting seeds. There's a few creative friends in the area. We're like planting the seed, like, come on, your voice. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to give her a nudge for you.
Please do.
But she's shown two Octobers in a row now. And she's so prolific. She's always got new work, and she has such a following. So she's been a real boon to us. And then upcoming, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing talking so much about this. You guys feel free to interrupt me.
We love it.
But we're having explosion of florals kind of show where Julia Einstein, who's the artist in residency at City Farm, who has been documenting in paintings the growing seasons of the farm, will show on the big wall alongside actual flowers from my best friend in the whole wide world, Vanessa Smith, who just took down her piece at Art in Bloom, and she's done Art in Bloom at the NCMA for the last 7 years, I think. And she has been a really big part of the pocket too, because she weekly creates an arrangement of flowers that is in conversation with my work or usually with the guest star artist's work. So all along it's been there's been a flower component, but this time for April and May, we're going to have a big all flower power pocket.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait. There's so many through lines here. It's not even funny, Caitlin. So I just did my first pedestal, co-designed it for Art in Bloom as well. We just took it down. Well, by the time you listen to this recording, it would have been a few weeks. But yeah, no, insane. And I've always loved that idea of the flowers and the plants in conversation with the art, which we'll have to dive in. We'll go back to upcoming things towards the end. But I do want to kind of reverse the tape a little bit for a second and ask you. So you mentioned, and this makes perfect sense, especially, we've talked to other folks that run galleries or work in gallery spaces about this, and what you're saying resonates with it. That idea of it's all about the relationship and who you know. And obviously, like you mentioned, Leslie, love you, Leslie. Definitely a fangirl. But, like let's say you've known Leslie for several years and you're like, okay, I know this is an artist that can produce. And if I say, hey, I have a time slot for these months, exhibition wise, do you think you can have enough work? If it's someone whose work you're familiar with, whose work ethic, style, everything, then it's a lot easier to open the doors to your space and like welcome them in and then essentially work together, right? You as in a way to promote them and then them to have it in your space and like be able to be exposed to the folks that you attract into the space, which is, I mean, it's a wonderful relationship. So a lot of gallery spaces, of course, will do a lot of the same things, but how about someone that, say, for example, has not had a chance to meet you in person, or perhaps they're a little shy, yeah, right? We also don't want to welcome anybody to bring the canvases under their arm into a space. Please don't. Please reach out in advance and just inquire. But good, because that can be a little awkward. Like love your work, but also there's a form on the website. But actually, I do want to ask you. So, if any of the artists that are listening to this podcast are like, "Oh my gosh, Pocket sounds amazing," haven't met Caitlin, maybe we've crossed paths. What is your submission process like?
Well, I don't really have a formal process. My advice to anyone would be to start by coming in and seeing the space, meeting me. Buy a pack of note cards, and I'll like you. I'm kidding, not kidding. But really, I think that when I'm approached by someone who clearly does not know anything about the place, that's the first tingle of, I think some other people might say they would prefer to be approached by email first, but for me, the very first thing that happens is some kind of simpatico feeling, and I think there are many, many artists whose work wouldn't belong there, or who would feel that immediately when they came in. But it's the wrong size. It's there are subject matter that I think you get an intuitive kind of artist can walk into a space and say, oh, I can see my work here, or I can't. And then you can have a conversation that either confirms or denies your suspicion with me, I think.
Yeah, I love that.
And that doesn't, I mean, I carry exclusively local work. So obviously you can't necessarily do this with a gallery in Seattle, but you can do it online and get a lot of a sense of the place before you approach them. And I would say that any gallerist you kind of got to scratch frankly, scratch my ego a little bit and say you love the space, that you love what I'm doing, sorry, we all that's just how
Back
it
to
goes.
that little validation part. We all like a little bit of that positivity, of course.
Sure.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. I like to we had some art collectors on a recent episode, and they also mentioned the whole go to the events. That's where I know they were talking about other collectors, but it definitely then would apply to, if they wanted to meet you and you have an opening for an exhibition, then that's a great spot. They don't have to necessarily approach and be like, I'm the only one in the gallery space. This is awkward. They can just be amongst other people and mingle and say hello and then get to see the space, get to see how the flow of people goes, get to see how you interact with the artist and the guest. So I think that's great, solid advice right there.
Yeah,
I do want to.
yeah, we do. We have openings at least every 2 months and events almost monthly. So that's great advice. And I totally get the feeling that for many people, it would feel terrible to walk in the door and say, I made this thing, you want to see it? That's very difficult for me and for lots of people. And it's probably not the best way to start the whole thing. So yeah, you said it as well as I could.
Perfect. I do want to ask you, what is, jumping onto the business side for a second, what is one of the biggest lessons, realizations, revelations, whatever you want to call it, that you've had as a gallery owner, which is a completely different, in many ways, a completely different hat than being a self-employed artist, right? In which case we're still business owners, but we're only representing ourselves. Once we're representing other people, the overhead's a little different too, I imagine. Kind of
Yeah.
another ballgame. So what's one of the biggest takeaways you've had from it?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess one revelation would be um that it even more than you can imagine, this is all about like developing relationships with people. It's almost like you got to make a bunch of friends as a gallerist, and someday your friend is going to come in and see the piece that is for them. I think, it's hard to figure out a way to put this, but like you have to make people like you and like your way of seeing the world and your way of seeing art. I feel like you are, I'm developing relationships with people who begin to think that if I have something in my place, they like it because not because they like me. That's not it, but that you know it just is. It's a symbiosis of relational being. It's really cool how it happens. Um, and of course it's all about me um um learning to give back to the artists that I represent so that it's about being a very honest and upfront with your business, honest and upfront about your mistakes. I dropped a Leslie Pruneau painting while I was cleaning. I was taking down Christmas and I damaged her painting. And let me tell you that is a terrible, terrible, terrible feeling. And, um, I had to just be like, I'm, crawling to her feeling terrible. And of course she was fine and she fixed it and everything was okay. But um, but it's it's developing relationships with your clientele and your artists that all turns into like this really groovy circle. I don't know if I said anything valuable there, but that's what it
No.
feels like really.
I think you did. It's like, think of those places. I don't know if anybody will relate to this. I hope so. Think of those places like those antique shops that are in the middle of a little cute, quaint town. You don't go necessarily for the folks that run it. You run for their taste, like, and their eye for finding certain things, and then they get known for set things. I'll use a simple example for this one. Let's say you're into 1950s and 60s Americana, vintage furniture. You may find one of those little stores that, yes, they carry a little bit of everything, but that's what they specialize in. That's what you resonate towards. So suddenly you're building a relationship with the folks that work there and saying, hey, if you get one of those little chairs that has the phone book that goes underneath it, give me a call. I'd love it. So as a gallerist, in many ways, you're doing the same thing. You didn't necessarily produce the thing, but you're curating the thing that goes into the space. And then there's people that are resonating with what your taste making is like,
Yep.
if that makes sense. I
Yep.
hope I rephrased it.
Well, and the very best kind of gallerists, which I probably am not that good at, also develop a relationship where they understand the taste of their customers and can spot something and make a placement. That takes a lot of social finesse that I wish I had more of and I strive to have, but I it's kind of a brave thing to do, to call somebody and say, hey, this is the pocket, I have a piece from so and so that I think you might really love, and that's brave,
As you build relationships with maybe repeat collectors or having people that consistently come in, like, they're looking for this size or this color piece for this room. And it's
Yep.
those soft skills that, I mean, with as any business owner, there's always the tangible, like hard skills of building spreadsheets or hanging a gallery wall, and then also the soft skills of building relationships with people. Those finesse that you're like can't always be taught. They simply need to be like observed and then admired from afar. And then, okay, how can I incorporate that?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And so, what advice would you have for an artist who may be thinking about opening up their own gallery to represent other artists?
Mm. Well, I would say, um, keep your overhead as low as you can. And I I tend to think that, well, yeah, don't expect you're going to make a lot of money doing this would be the first thing. You have to really know that you love it. And hopefully, if the example you're talking about is an artist opening an art gallery, then make sure you prioritize and figure out your own goals for your own art, and build in, time, space, et cetera, et cetera. It's very difficult to do that. And it's a tricky balance that I am constantly failing and sometimes succeeding at. So, um, but, but
Yeah, I am curious what that balance looks like for you. We don't have to go deep into it, but have you found it's been helpful to have like set days where you're full in your creative practice and then days at the gallery,
yeah,
morning versus evenings?
yeah, I'm real fortunate that it's been a constant struggle to do this, but it has worked out that I can staff the gallery with, sometimes with, other artists, and sometimes just by I trade, one day of gallery sitting with some people who work from home, and they were going crazy and they wanted a place to work. So I said, oh, the pocket's free every day before noon, because I'm a nocturnal hamster. Um, so I'm never there. It's so they work there in the mornings, and then they gallery sit on Thursdays, and they're lovely, magnanimous people. And I'm always in my studio at home with my phone right there. So if there's a question, I'm on hand to answer it. And also, I've had a number of artists who don't have public facing studios, who enjoy the opportunity of, gallery sitting, so that they can work. I have my workspace there. They can work in the pocket, and they can, get out of the house and talk to some people and get a little bit of exposure for their work. And I do that by offering them a lower commission on sales, while they're during the time that they're gallery sitting. So yeah, I really do have to juggle to make sure that I, have enough time for my own work. And you know, even still, sometimes I wonder whether it's taking away more than I want it to. But for the time being, it's a worthwhile balancing act. It may not be forever, because it's not possible to, I don't think you can run a gallery, or at least not if you're made out of the cloth that I'm made out of, and also conquer the New York art world, or anything like that, or anything close to it. And the work that I make is so labor intensive, it takes for absolutely forever. So, and also I do work in the pocket a lot. We're not so busy that I can't sit there and sew. So, Saturdays, I don't get a lot done, but lots of other days, there's plenty of time. I try to arrange my work so that, because my work is such that there's a big think part, designy part, and then there's another 50% of the project is just sitting at the sewing machine, mindlessly, happily, meditatively sewing. So I can do that anywhere.
Yeah, and we're not even counting on the business side for your own and the pocket. We're just talking about production.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's definitely a juggle. Or
Yeah.
hashtag artist life, as they say.
I have
Caitlin,
not
what
yet
is
given the credit that I should to my husband, who does the books for me. So
oh goodness. Well,
that's
that's a big one right there. Caitlin, what is your vision for the Pocket Gallery moving forward? Next, obviously we can't really predict of the next 10 years, etc. But for the next few years, what are some big things vision wise that you're thinking about for the gallery?
there are some things that I may not really be at liberty to discuss because there might be changes happening sooner than later. So I might demur on that question a little bit. I hope to keep it going, and I hope to, uh, you know, continue to work on keeping the proper balance between a gallery and studio practice. And there may be TBD.
A perfectly valid question, perfectly valid answer. Caitlin, how do you define success as an artist? It's a question we definitely like to ask everybody on the podcast.
I love that question, and sometimes I think that the answer would be success would be having an assistant, but then again, when I think about the actual reality of having an assistant and whether I could get my S together enough to decide what they would do versus what I would do, it's pretty daunting. But I do think about that. Like, there is enough in my head that I want to do that it would be real awesome if I never had to go to the grocery store or do my laundry or as I said about my own work, there are definitely chunks of it that, I can imagine a workshop with a couple of assistants running a sewing machine. So that might be one. That's like a fantasy version of what it means, what success would mean, because it would. But really, for me, the true answer is not having to work another kind of job and being able to do this and relax that the water bill will be paid and not be shut off. And that's the real truth. And that's what feel so fortunate in my life thus far to have accomplished with varying degrees of success in various fields of art, is just, not having to supplement it with a full-time job or something. I've had bartend, and I might again, who knows, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as artists, I feel like I always say, I do have a full-time job, but I am a full-time artist with a full-time day job. And as artists, many of us, depending on our income streams, it's a full-time gallery owner and a full-time artist and a full-time musician. Like, we all balance these full-time gigs to where you're just kind of bouncing from one to the other. So definitely being able to streamline those is a great level of success.
That's right. Yeah. And there's that whole thing about if your job doesn't feel like work, then, that's, and I work all the time. I never stop. I
Exactly.
never am not working, but that's totally okay.
It's definitely that infamous quote that I talk about all the time where they say, like, well, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
That's
right.
I was trying to come up with that one. You got it.
Which I do agree with that to an extent, but honestly, I think it's almost the opposite. It's, if you love what you do, you'll never work harder in your life. Because as you just mentioned, you enjoy the process. There's always things that you may like more than others, but we're still working. And it's, if you love what you do, you honestly probably work more. So giving ourselves credit where credit is due.
Yeah, my husband and I fairly recently had a conversation with a financial guy who said something about when do you want to retire? And we were both like,
never.
What am I going to do when I retire?
But have never imagined that in our lives. Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely looks different than a traditional 9-to-5 career, for sure. But what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative career?
Be brave, I guess. Hold on to your britches, lady, because it's going to take a lot. Yeah, that would be. That's the advice I would give to anybody. Like, if you're looking for an easy path where you feel secure about everything all the time, don't pick this one. It's not there. So,
there's definitely a lot of resilience that's needed as creatives.
Yeah.
Like being agile, being resilient, and being able to switch paths as needed. It's very different than, as we're saying, a very corporate, okay, you go to school for X, you get entry level Y, you go to this rank, you have that roadmap picked, which is part of the appeal for many people on the creative process. Is you can make your journey what it is, but also terrifyingly, you can make your journey whatever it is. And sometimes you want someone just to give you that roadmap. And so we really appreciate you being on the podcast and sharing your roadmap, because that's one thing we love to unpack with artists is what does success look like? What does being a full-time artist really look like? Because
Yeah.
it's never linear. Everyone's paths are so different, and really demystifying that process can be so helpful to artists at all levels.
Well, yep. And it's nothing but being taking a series of leaps. And, I feel like you never in anything I've done, yeah, there's nobody there to say, okay, if you do this and this, it's going to turn out like this. You know, it, you leap and you hopefully learn how to pivot, recognize when it's not working and pivot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's something that I don't think we've really mentioned, but it ties in when you said be brave, and it just kind of stuck with me. You don't have an art degree and you run a gallery. I mean, as someone who did not go to art school, went to business school instead, I'm like, yes, yes. I'm like, big standing ovation, Caitlin. Yes. I mean, it's
uh,
super brave. You're going beyond not just representing yourself, but representing others and just going like, yeah, I can do this. Like, this is huge. I
yeah.
don't think we've talked about this enough. This is huge.
Well, yeah, I think, well, you're, I didn't know you had a business degree. So yeah, I'm gonna come knocking on your door one of these days.
Yeah,
Studio
Adriana,
203, you know where to find me.
yeah, we always joke because I went to art school, but now I work in digital marketing, doing email and social media creation. And then Adriana went to business school, and then, of course, has her art business. So I feel like our careers and paths have mirrored each other, but really strengthened each other's as well. Of, again, just sharing it forward. What do you have? What do I have? And how can we share it with as many artists as possible?
Your chimeras. That's neat.
Absolutely. Now, one of the questions we like to ask Caitlin as we come towards the end is, if someone just randomly hands you $100, what would you splurge it on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Oh, I think I'd get a really great, well, I'd have to have a little more space for it, but a really good coffee machine in the pocket, I don't know, can you get that for $100? Okay, I'd buy the coffee for it. To be able to make a beautiful cup of coffee to hand to my guests.
To your
There
future
is one.
careers.
Yes, and there's a machine because I got one for Christmas a few years ago. One side has a drip, the other side has a Keurig, and it is about $100. So if
Okay,
it's just you, you do the little cups. If you're gonna have a guest through, you just do the drip pot.
voila.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that later.
I love that. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It has been so much fun. But before we hop off, so what exciting exhibitions do you have coming up that our listeners should know about?
Oh, so I mentioned our upcoming uh floral explosion in the pocket, which my work is not really a part of, but I'm very excited about that. And I didn't mention that I'm also programming the art in the salon that is next door to the pocket, which is full of the floral paintings of Margot Benefield. So even more layers of spring shenanigans with flowers. But in my own work, I just said yes to a gallery and mid-century modern furniture store to creating 9 pieces for, I think, what will amount to being sort of a window display in her newly opening gallery furniture place. So I am going to be thinking in terms of sort of decorator mindset, thinking about limited palettes and abstract pleasing shapes to go with beautiful mid-century furniture. So that is and I've kind of set myself a crazy deadline for that. So I'm going to be head down working on that. And then in the fall, I have I mentioned this briefly, but in September, I will be showing work at Rebus, which is
Nice.
really fantastic gallery slash grocery space in Boylan Heights. And I'm going to be, for those that are watching, there's a piece behind me that's part of this series. I'm going to be creating 12 new Raleigh landmark pieces. So that's
Super exciting.
that's my
Sounds,
year.
sounds like your studio is going to be very active and busy over the next few weeks. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today and taking time out of your very busy schedule. Before we go, how can people stay connected with you after they listen to the episode?
Well, so my website is CaitlinCary.com. And the Pocket website is a little more clunky than that. It's like the Pocket Raleigh, but I'm hoping that if you Google the Pocket Gallery Raleigh, it will take only one easy step to launch you straight to our website. And the Instagrams are good. The Pocket Raleigh. That's where I think Instagram for the Pocket is the best place.
That's all right. We'll definitely, for our listeners who want to stay connected with you, we'll make sure that we link everything in the show notes so they will have access to that. It'll be one click away.
You can give them my address.
I don't know about that. There might be some liability there, but
we'll put the address to the Pocket. How's that?
Okay.
Now, Caitlin, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can discuss networking as artist and gallery owner on a bonus segment for our podcast supporters?
I'd be honored. Yep.
Awesome.
Yay.
So for our listeners, if you want to become a supporter of the podcast, head on over to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast and help us continue the project and level up the quality of the podcast you're listening to.
Absolutely. If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, maybe share some questions you'd like us to address on the podcast in future episodes, you can connect with us on social media at Minute Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to listen to the podcast, we're at Level Up Artist on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.